You obsess over your digital security, right? I mean, you've got complex passwords, facial recognition on your phone, biometric locks on all your banking apps.
Yeah, two-factor authentication for everything.
Exactly. But then the absolute most vulnerable piece of your personal security infrastructure is literally just sitting in a tin box on a stick at the end of your driveway.
It is the ultimate security paradox.
Yeah.
We lock the digital windows, but we leave the physical front door just wide open for anyone to walk up and look inside.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the hidden vulnerabilities of physical mail right now in 2026.
Right.
We're going to explore the surprising federal infrastructure required to actually secure your mail and, unpack why a virtual mailbox is rapidly shifting from just a neat tech convenience to a completely mandatory tool.
Yeah, especially for global citizens, students, and honestly, anyone who cares about their privacy.
Definitely. And we're pulling from a great stack of sources today. Comprehensive security guides from the virtual mailbox provider getmyusmail.com, plus community insights and service breakdowns from the Neighborhood Parcel YouTube channel.
Which is great material because before we can even begin to understand the virtual solution, we really have to look at the mechanics of the physical problem. And the data paints a pretty grim picture of how broken the traditional mail system has actually become.
Yeah, I was looking through the research for today's dive, and I knew mail theft was an issue, but the sheer scale of the fraud happening right now just, it blew my mind. Like, how much are we actually losing to this?
It's staggering. A January 2026 Forbes report highlights that mail theft and check fraud now cost Americans over $20 billion annually.
$20 billion.
Wow. And to give you a sense of the frequency, the Federal Trade Commission received over 6.4 million fraud and identity theft reports in 2024.
That is wild.
It's nearly a 20-fold increase since 2001. We are basically looking at an identity theft incident happening every 4.9 seconds in the U.S.
Every 4.9 seconds. And what strikes me about that $20 billion a year is that, well, this isn't some sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attack. This is incredibly low-tech.
Oh, highly low-tech. Traditional mail fails because it is just fundamentally exposed. I mean, you have doorstep theft, which is the single most common source of check fraud.
The classic porch pirate.
Right. And you have what the industry calls neighbor intercepts in multi-unit buildings or apartments.
Where packages are just scooped up from shared entryways.
Exactly. And then you have the mechanism driving a massive chunk of that $20 billion, which is check washing.
Okay, stop there, because I've heard that term check washing thrown around a lot recently. What is the actual mechanism there? Like, how does someone wash a piece of paper?
It's essentially basic chemistry. Thieves steal an envelope out of your mailbox that feels like it has a check in it, maybe a birthday card or a bill payment.
Right.
They take that check and soak it in common household chemicals. Usually it's acetone or bleach solvents.
Just regular stuff from under the sink.
Pretty much, yeah. The solvent dissolves the dye, used in standard ballpoint pens, completely lifting the handwritten ink right off the paper. But, and this is the key, it leaves the mechanically printed parts of the check completely intact.
Oh, wow. So like your name, the bank's routing number, the watermarks, all of that stays.
Exactly. They essentially create a blank check with your real signature already on it.
That is terrifyingly simple. So they just dry it off and fill it out.
Precisely. They hang it up to dry, and then they just rewrite the payee name to themselves, or, a mule. Change a $50 utility payment to $5,000 and just go cash it.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's insane. We willingly put two-factor authentication on our streaming accounts just to watch a movie.
Right.
But we leave our actual banking details and checks in a tin box that anyone can just open. I mean, it's like leaving your unlocked smartphone sitting on a park bench and just hoping nobody picks it up.
It really is. And the underlying flaw tying all of this together is that traditional physical mailboxes have zero access logging.
Meaning there's no record of who opened it?
None. If a wash check or a bank statement goes missing from your physical box, there is no audit trail. You have absolutely no idea when it arrived, who touched it, or when it disappeared.
You only find out weeks later when your bank account is drained.
Exactly.
So the obvious logical answer is to digitize the mail, right? To take that physical vulnerability out of the equation entirely with a virtual mailbox.
Right.
But my immediate thought is, wait a minute, I'm stopping a random thief from stealing my mail, sure, but aren't I just paying a stranger in a warehouse somewhere to open and read my sensitive tax documents? How does that actually solve the human vulnerability problem?
That is a vital question. Because you can't just have someone scanning your government documents in their basement.
Right.
Building a virtual fortress requires a massive, invisible architecture of trust and physical security. Reputable providers in this space operate as fully licensed commercial mail receiving agencies, or CMRAs.
Okay, so what does a CMRA classification actually require? Because, I mean, anyone can rent a warehouse.
They can, but they cannot legally process mail without federal oversight. CMRAs are heavily regulated by the United States Postal Service. To even activate a mailbox for a customer, the agency must utilize USPS Form 1583.
Which is an identity verification form.
Yes, and it requires verifying the identity of every single customer using 2 valid forms of ID. Plus, they have to comply with federal anti-money laundering regulations, and they must maintain a physical, verifiable business location.
Wow, so you actually have to provide way more identification and pass federal verification to get a digital mailbox than you do to buy a physical mailbox at a hardware store and stick it in the ground.
Much more. And that strict oversight extends to the facility itself. If you look at how top-tier facilities operate, take a provider like Get My US Mail, for example.
Right, they run a major hub in Massachusetts, I think.
Yes, they do. And they emphasize physical security first. We're talking controlled access to the building, constant surveillance, and a strict chain of custody.
Okay, walk me through that chain of custody. Mail arrives at the loading dock, then what happens?
The moment a piece of mail arrives, it is barcoded, photographed, and logged into the system. They are actively creating that audit trail that the metal box on your driveway completely lacks.
Okay, that makes sense.
And if you request a scan of the contents, it's done in a monitored environment, often using automated scanning beds to minimize human contact with the actual text.
Right, so someone isn't just sitting there reading your letters.
Exactly. And when you hit trash on your digital portal, the physical paper isn't just tossed in a recycling bin out back. It's destroyed on-site using professional cross-cut shredders.
Okay, so that covers the physical warehouse side.
Sure.
But let me push back on the digital side for a second.
Sure.
Because I was looking at the Identity Theft Resource Center's 2025 annual data breach report, and they noted a 5% increase in data compromises last year.
Yeah, the numbers are going up.
That's over 3,000 massive data breach incidents. So if my mail is now a PDF on a server, aren't I just trading physical doorstep theft for online hacking? Why is an encrypted web portal actually safer than a locked P.O. box at the post office?
It really comes down to the math of modern encryption versus the physics of a metal lock.
Okay, how so?
Well, to pry open a P.O. box, someone basically needs a crowbar, a little leverage, and maybe 10 seconds of privacy. It's incredibly easy. But to break the encryption on a secure virtual mailbox portal, these systems use SSL and TLS encryption for data in transit and AES 256 storage for the scanned documents at rest.
Which is, what, the same encryption standard used by major financial institutions in the military?
Right. With current computing technology, breaking AES 256 is mathematically, computationally infeasible. It would take a network of supercomputers millions of years to brute force that encryption.
Wow.
Yeah, so your scanned mail sitting behind AES 256 and mandatory two-factor authentication is exponentially safer from a hacker than a piece of paper sitting behind a 50-cent brass lock is from a crowbar.
I see. But what if an employee inside that facility just decides to go rogue?
That's where the federal deterrence factor kicks in. Under Title 18, Section 1703 of the United States Code, mail tampering by postal or agency employees is a federal crime that carries up to 5 years in prison.
Ah, okay.
The system is designed to make the risk-to-reward ratio incredibly unappealing for criminals.
So we've established that this CMRA infrastructure is essentially an ultra-secure, federally compliant digital fortress. But who actually goes through the trouble of setting this up?
Wow.
Obviously, someone who has had their mail stolen might, but who needs this level of infrastructure on a daily basis.
If we look at the demographics driving this industry, it's anyone whose life doesn't fit neatly into a single permanent zip code. It's the nomadic reality of the modern world, specifically students and global citizens.
The numbers on that are massive, by the way. In the 2023 to 2024 academic year alone, over 444,000 U.S. students studied abroad, with a huge chunk of them heading to Italy, Spain, the UK, and France. And on the flip side, we have 1.2 million international students studying here in the U.S.
And both of those groups face the exact same logistical nightmare. The bureaucratic friction of living in a temporary international state of limbo.
Let's walk through what that fiction actually looks like, because I really don't think people realize how quickly things fall apart when you don't have a reliable address. Picture a college junior, okay?
Okay.
Let's say she's heading from her university in Boston to Florence for a semester abroad. What happens to her mail?
Well, if she just leaves her U.S. bank account tied to her old apartment or her campus dorm address, she is stepping into a minefield.
How so?
Let's say she's 2 months into her semester in Italy. Her U.S. bank decides to send a routine security update. Or maybe they issue a new debit card because her old one expired. They mail it to the Boston dorm.
But the dorm mailroom is closed for the summer, or she doesn't live there anymore.
Exactly. So the campus mailroom worker marks it returned to sender. It goes back to the bank.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The bank's security algorithm sees returned mail and immediately flags the account. The system assumes the account might be compromised, abandoned, or the victim of identity theft. So automatically, the bank freezes the account.
Oh, wow. So she is sitting in a cafe in Florence, tries to buy lunch, and her card is declined. She's thousands of miles from home and suddenly locked out of her own money just because a piece of plastic bounced off a closed door in Boston.
It happens constantly. And it's not just banks either. It's financial aid disconnects, like missing a scholarship renewal deadline because the physical letter went to an old apartment.
Right.
Or think about the international students studying in the U.S. There are nearly 295,000 international students on OPT, which is optional practical training, working in the U.S. after graduation. That's a 21% increase, by the way.
Right. And they absolutely need a stable, permanent U.S. address for their employment authorization cards and their tax compliance.
And the IRS communicates almost exclusively via physical mail. If an international student on an F-1 visa needs an individual taxpayer identification number, an ITN, and that IRS letter gets lost in a chaotic, rotating student worker mailroom,
Oh, man.
their legal tax status gets incredibly complicated. Relying on a communal dorm mailroom for sensitive federal documents is just a massive liability.
Because basically the campus mailroom is the Wild West. It's handled by rotating student workers. Getting your sensitive IRS or Social Security mail delivered there is like leaving your diary in the communal dorm fridge.
That is exactly what it's like.
So instead of just hoping for the best, how do they actually integrate a virtual mailbox into this transition? Because they can't just sign up the day they board the plane, right?
No, it requires a deliberate setup timeline.
Yeah.
The process starts well before they leave. It's basically a 5-step process. First, they plan and select a plan. Then they complete that federal form 1583.
Which requires a notary. Do they have to go find a physical notary office before they leave?
Not anymore. The framework now allows for online notarization, which can be done in a few minutes via a webcam.
Oh, it's convenient.
Very. Once the identity is verified and the virtual address is assigned, the critical third step is updating all their accounts: banking, university, IRS, credit cards. And they need to do this with their new permanent address at least 2 weeks before their flight.
I assume that's giving the system time to actually route everything to the secure CMRA facility?
Yes. And from that point on, they set their preferences and go abroad. The virtual mailbox becomes their permanent U.S. anchor. They can be moving between sublets in Tokyo, dorms in Boston, or traveling through Europe, and their financial and legal footprint remains perfectly stable and accessible from their smartphone.
But securing the mail as it arrives as a PDF only solves half the problem. What happens when that AES 256 encrypted digital document needs to exist in the physical world again? Because, I mean, we haven't completely estaked paper.
We absolutely haven't. And that brings us to the broader ecosystem of managing a global identity. Because getting the mail is one thing, but managing the life cycle of that sensitive information is another.
Right, like secure destruction. I noticed in the research on facilities like Neighborhood Parcel in Massachusetts, they don't just act as a mail drop. They handle bulk residential document shredding, starting at around 99 cents a pound, and they even do medical X-ray disposal.
Which is critical. You mentioned the vulnerability of the tin mailbox earlier, but the neighborhood recycling bin is just as dangerous.
Oh, for sure.
Because of strict privacy laws like iPay and state-level data protection regulations in places like Massachusetts, you cannot just throw old medical records, X-rays, or tax returns in the trash. These CMRA hubs double as secure destruction facilities to close the loop on that physical paper trail.
But what about when you need to authenticate that paper trail? Let's say our student in Florence decides to stay and start a business or get married, and the Italian government says, we need to see your official U.S. birth certificate, and we need proof that it's real. An encrypted PDF isn't going to satisfy an Italian bureaucrat.
No, It definitely won't. And this is where we run into the concept of the apostille.
Break that down for me. What actually is an apostille?
Think of an apostille as the modern equivalent of a physical wax seal from a monarch.
Okay.
It is an international authentication certificate. When you present a document, like a birth certificate, a corporate charter, a background check, to a foreign government, they have no way of knowing if the signature of some random town clerk in Ohio is genuine.
Right. Why would they?
Exactly. So an apostille is a secondary certification, usually issued by a Secretary of State, that verifies the authenticity of the signatures and seals on that document. It proves to the foreign government that the document is legally valid.
And this requires the physical movement of actual original paper, which brings up an interesting story I saw in the sources about a Worcester, Massachusetts resident trying to navigate this exact process for international business translation and apostille services.
Yes, this resident was deeply frustrated trying to find a service online. Because there is a sea of ambiguous transient web portals out there offering to handle your vital records, but you have no idea who is actually behind the screen. Are they a licensed agency or just a guy in his living room acting as a middleman?
And when you're mailing your original physical birth certificate or your company's and corporation documents, you really can't afford a middleman losing it.
Exactly, which is why this resident ultimately sought out a brick-and-mortar office. In this case, Massachusetts Apostille Services, which operates alongside Neighborhood Parcels. They needed what they called a tangible presence and certified reliability for the swift execution of these records.
Makes sense.
They needed a physical office they could walk into, or at least verify exists on a map, with decades of experience handling international bureaucracy.
Wait, this is fascinating. We are actively setting up these high-tech AES 256 encrypted virtual mailboxes specifically so we don't have to deal with physical paper and physical locations.
Right.
But then, the moment we need to prove our identity to a foreign government, we actively seek out a brick-and-mortar office with a physical address to prove to them that our physical paper is real. Are we just trapped in a bureaucratic loop?
It feels like a loop, but it's really a necessary hybrid.
Yeah.
The modern world just demands both. We use the digital realm, the virtual mailbox, the encryption, for the speed, convenience, and security of transit. We want our daily information to move instantly and safely without sitting in a driveway.
Yeah.
But international law, human trust, and bureaucratic verification still rely heavily on the physical.
So the apostille is the wax seal on the digital world.
Beautifully put. The apostille is the bridge. The physical brick-and-mortar office provides the legal accountability and the chain of custody, while the digital infrastructure provides the modern delivery. You need the physical anchor to authorize the digital freedom.
The physical anchor allows for the digital freedom. That is a perfect way to summarize this entire ecosystem. So, bringing this all together for you, the listener, what we've uncovered today is that relying on traditional physical mail isn't just a minor annoyance when it gets wet in the rain. It is a $20 billion a year vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Leaving your checks and identity documents in an unmonitored box is one of the highest risk behaviors you can engage in today.
And the solution requires way more than just scanning an envelope. It relies on the Commercial Mail Receiving Agency framework, which is this unique blend of intense federal-level physical security combined with high-end digital encryption.
And whether you are a college student prepping for a semester studying art in Florence, an entrepreneur managing an international LLC, or just someone who wants to permanently stop the neighbor from intercepting your packages in the apartment lobby, this invisible infrastructure directly impacts your day-to-day security.
It is entirely about taking control of your physical data trail in an increasingly digital, yet physically vulnerable world.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've talked about how our daily mail, our banking, and even our corporate legal documents are all becoming fully virtual, centralized behind encrypted portals, and managed by highly regulated third-party proxies.
Right.
If our lives are entirely portable, at what point does the very concept of a physical residential address become completely obsolete as a way for society to verify who we are?
It's an incredibly important question to ask, because as long as our system keeps relying on that tin box on a stick at the end of the driveway, we are leaving our most valuable asset, which is our identity, completely exposed to the elements.
Something to think about the next time you hear the mail truck pull up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.